In this lecture, we're going to look at the second part of the B vitamins, which are a type or a group of water-soluble vitamins. We'll start with folic acid, which is also called folate. Folic acid refers to the synthetic or man-made form, whereas folate refers to the form found naturally in foods. Folate is important because it is a coenzyme needed for DNA synthesis. Essentially, it forms DNA, and it's very important in cell division, which you'll see is important for pregnant women to have enough folate to help prevent against neural tube defects in their developing fetus. Another thing that folate does is to help metabolize amino acids and their derivatives. But the primary thing you need to know is that it forms DNA and plays a role in cell division. Folic acid deficiency causes a certain type of anemia. In early red blood cell synthesis, if you have immature blood cells, they can't divide because they can't form new DNA. Remember, folate plays a role in the formation of DNA. The cells get really big because they do not have enough DNA to promote nuclei division. And so these large, immature forms of red blood cells occur, and they're called megaloblasts. Those are really big, immature red blood cells. Folate deficiency is called megaloblastic anemia. Another name for that same term is macrocytic anemia. The symptoms include things like inflammation of the tongue, diarrhea, poor growth, mental confusion, depression, and nerve dysfunction. In this slide, you're seeing what happens with folate deficiency anemia. On the top, it shows you normal red blood cells in people who have adequate folate in their diet. Normally, their cells divide and they have healthy red blood cells. If a person is deficient in folate, as you see on the bottom, the cells are unable to divide and they become a megaloblast, causing a type of anemia called macrocytic or megaloblastic anemia. Those are large cells that are immature because they lack the capacity to split into smaller, more functional red blood cells. Another thing that folic acid deficiency does is it causes neural tube defects in the developing fetus. So if a mom is deficient in folic acid, what happens is usually at the very beginning of her pregnancy, that's when the neural tubes form. In the absence of enough folic acid, defects can occur. Okay, and you can see a normal spine pictured, and then the most common neural tube defect is called spina bifida. Okay, and so the failure of the neural tubes to close in the very earliest stages of pregnancy causes neural tube defects. And so a large-scale public health intervention in the United States has been put underway in order to make sure that women of childbearing age have enough folic acid. The way we do this is that since 1996, folic acid has been mandated to be enriched back into the bread supply. So enriched wheat products contain folic acid. And a good rule of thumb is for pregnant women, as soon as you stop taking your birth control, if you're on birth control, the notion is to start taking prenatal vitamins. And what happens there is because neural tube defects form, or neural tubes close rather, right after conception, that's oftentimes before a woman knows she's pregnant. Most women have to wait at least a month, they miss their period, then they realize they're pregnant. By then it could be too late. So if you're not on contraception, you should be on multivitamins or prenatal vitamins that have folic acid. And the enrichment of our grain supply means that most women of childbearing age in the U.S. have good baseline folic acid levels. In excess, folic acid is dangerous because it can mask the deficiency of vitamin B12. You'll learn by reading in your text that vitamin B12 and folate work synergistically. They work together. The upper limit for folic acid is 1 milligram a day, or 1,000 micrograms. The RDA differs in pregnancy compared to non-pregnancy because of those increased folic acid needs to help prevent neural tube defects and promote the closure of neural tubes. So the typical adult who's not pregnant or breastfeeding needs 400 micrograms a day, whereas a pregnant woman needs 600. Folic acid is very susceptible to heat. About 50 to 90% of it is destroyed in cooking. A good way to remember where folate comes in the diet is to think of the Latin word folicin. That's the root of folate, and folicin means leaf. So dark green leafy vegetables are the primary sources of folate. Other things like orange juice, dried beans, and then any fortified or enriched bread cereal will have a good amount of folate, as does milk. The next B vitamin we'll look at is vitamin B12. It's also called cobalamin or cyanocobalamin. B12 plays a role in folate metabolism. So B12 and folate, they work together. B12 is unique because it requires something called intrinsic factor for its absorption. Intrinsic factor is something that's made by the cells of your stomach. And Another thing that B12 does is to help maintain the myelin coating on your nerves. Again, as with all B vitamins, there's an important role in neurological health associated with this B vitamin. Vitamin B12 deficiency is called pernicious anemia. It occurs from the lack of B12 absorption. So you can take all the B12 you want or eat it all in your diet, but because you're not making enough intrinsic factor, you can't absorb that B12. B12 is necessary in order to help absorb iron in your body as well. And excessive amounts of folic acid can help mask B12 deficiencies. So it's important that you're not going over the UL for folic acid because you could be hiding a potential B12 deficiency. B12 is found most readily in animal foods. That's the one that vegans have to supplement with. We're concerned about elderly people being at higher risk for deficiency because the older you get, the less gastric secretions you make and the less intrinsic factor you make in your stomach. If you don't make a lot of intrinsic factor, then it goes without saying that you're not going to be able to absorb a lot of B12. There is no upper limit established for B12, and the RDA for healthy adults is set at 2.4 micrograms per day. We find B12 again primarily in animal foods. Organ meats are a really rich source, like liver, kidneys, and heart. Meat, salmon, seafood, milk, and eggs, and then ready-to-eat cereals have a little bit of B12. But keep in mind that people who are on a vegan diet will need to supplement with B12. As far as B12 absorption goes, you eat vitamin B12 bound up with the proteins in the animal foods you eat. In your stomach, acid and pepsin help release the B12 from those food proteins. And the cells of your stomach lining release that compound called intrinsic factor. Moving on to your small intestine, in the upper portion of your small intestine, your duodenum, intrinsic factor binds to vitamin B12. In step 5, the lower part of the small intestine, the ileum, that B12 intrinsic factor complex binds to receptors on your intestinal cells, allowing for their absorption. A small amount of B12 that's not bound to intrinsic factor can be absorbed through the process known as passive diffusion. In your colon, B12 is synthesized by microorganisms but cannot be absorbed. So most of that absorption is going to occur, as with most nutrients, in your small intestine. The last B vitamin we'll look at is B6. It's also called pyridoxine. Pyridoxine refers to a group of compounds, including things like pyridoxal, pyridoxine, and pyridoxamine. All three forms, however, can convert to pyridoxal phosphate, which is required for many different enzyme reactions in your body. So like all the B vitamins, B6, one of its primary functions is that it is a coenzyme. It's involved in over 100 amino acid and protein reactions. It synthesizes things like neurotransmitters, helps convert that essential amino acid tryptophan to niacin. It also helps you break down your stored glycogen into glucose. So remember, if your blood sugar levels dip low because you haven't eaten in a long time, your body should be breaking down glycogen from your liver, to a lesser degree your muscles, in order to provide glucose. Well, guess what? It's B6, the B vitamin, that allows that conversion to take place. Another thing B6 does is to help synthesize hemoglobin and white blood cells. B6 deficiency doesn't really have a name. Just say it has widespread symptoms, things like depression, vomiting, skin disorders, nerve problems, impaired immunity. Okay, that's one of the types of the deficiency. There's another type called hypochromic anemia. Okay, if B6 deficiency leads to small red blood cells that have low hemoglobin concentration, they make really light-colored small cells. So microcytic means small-celled, hypochromic means light in color. Okay? Your cells can't produce ATP if the aerobic metabolism is limited. Okay, so B6 deficiency, again, is called microcytic hypochromic anemia. And the symptoms are neurological in nature. Now, B6 excess, the UL set at 100 milligrams per day. Like all the B vitamins, because it has neurological involvement, too much or too little can lead to neural problems. So excessive amounts can lead to nerve damage. People eating more than 2 to 6 grams a day for a period of 2 or more months may develop irreversible nerve damage. Now think about that. 2 to 6 grams is 2,000 to 6,000 grams. The UL set at 100 milligrams. 2 to 6 grams is 2,000 to 6,000 milligrams. And the UL set at 100 milligrams. So that's going way, 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 way over the UL. But some people do that because they take really crazy B vitamin supplements because they think they're going to help with their energy. Okay? Of course, they don't help with energy. What happens with B vitamin supplements is that you oftentimes urinate out excess because they're water soluble, but they also in high levels can lead to neurological problems. Symptoms consist of things like gait abnormality, that's difficulty walking, tingling in the extremities, and numbness. As far as needs go, the RDA for B6 is set at 1.3 milligrams per day for adults aged 19 to 50. The best sources of B6, kind of like B12 and animal products, but you can get some in things like potatoes, spinach, bananas, and cantaloupe. We know that the B6 in animal foods and fortified foods is actually better absorbed than the B6 from plant foods. So that concludes our lessons about the B vitamins, and we'll move next on to vitamin C.